Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this very exciting Civilizations in Review. I am quite excited to chat about this fascinating empire. Thank you again to Zainab Nouri Al-Mufti here today to chat about writing and choosing this phenomenal empire. And again, thank you to Coretta, our very first Civilizations in Review, throwback to the Nabateans, to co-interview today. As a reminder, this will be all over our social media, on our Instagram, our Facebook, our website, our Spotify, and on our YouTube. So check us out to continue this wonderful conversation. But I will throw it to Coretta to start the 101 word intro, and we'll jump all into this Rashidun dynasty. Thank you again for writing it. Let's go.
All right. So this is the introduction that you wrote. Regarded as the rightly guided caliphs, the Rashidun Caliphate was the first Islamic caliphate to lead the expansion of the Islamic Empire. Established after the passing of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in 632 Common Era, a caliph or successor was elected to shepherd and expand the newfound religion of Islam. Abu Bakr, Umar ibn al-Khattab, Uthman ibn Affan, and Ali ibn Abi Talib were the first four successive caliphs to guide this transition. The period is often divided in traditional Muslim perception into a phase of triumph under the first two caliphs and one of sedition and civil war under the latter two. Wow. What a great start.
Thank you.
Ben, do you have a question to start us off? I know you're always ready to go.
Honestly, go for it, Coretta, if you have one. This is so exciting all off the bat. Thank you again, Zainab, for a powerful intro.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, right off the bat, why is this the civilization that you chose to go with?
I think the thing that really drew me to Rashidun and the thing that still interests me today is the fact that the Middle East and North Africa as we know it today kind of begins at this stage. So sort of the Arabization of all of those different parts of land begins with the Muslim conquests of those lands, so Southwest Asia and North Africa. So that's something that really interests me, and how that came to be, and in particular the Arabization of the non-Arab lands is really interesting. But also, of course, I'm Muslim, and it's really interesting just to learn a bit more about the history of how a religion that I follow has managed to come to present day and be, there's like 1.7 or 8 million billion even Muslims today. So it's really interesting how it came from a group of tribal Arabs into a global phenomenon today. So that's what drew me to it, yeah.
Lovely. I will say Ramadan Kareem first and foremost to all
Thank
of our
you.
listeners. And this is our very first civilization during Ramadan, and it's so beautifully fitting that it also happens to be this specific empire. I mean, the very first Islamic empire during our very first call during Ramadan. It's a beautiful marriage right there. So we did not plan that, listeners, but hey, I will take that as a wonderful combo. This is so fascinating for so many reasons, because there is such a discussion on all of these empires were Islamic, and every single empire really that we've talked about previous have really not been, have predated Islam or have been other religions. And so really to begin that conversation, as you said, in the year 632, is really starting with this empire and the modern awareness of the region. So again, thank you for writing this, because this is such an important beginning to the history. I want to talk about the word Rashidun, because that's a really important word. Most of the empires are the group of people or even the land they lived on. Rashidun is not that, as far as I'm aware. I wanted to throw it to you to give us some Arabic history too in this call.
Yeah, so Rashidun would literally translate to, like I say in the introduction, the rightly guided. And it's a sort of a variation on people's beliefs around it. So it's really within mainstream Sunni Islam that they're regarded as the Rashidin, whereas Shia Islam would not call them Rashidin. But yeah, it means they're rightly guided because they were sort of companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. They were very close with him. They were some of the first converts to the religion. And so they are considered sort of the ultimate Muslims, if you will. Like, everyone wants to be like them. So it's just the fact that they were very knowledgeable. They introduced many different concepts that we still use today, and they're considered rightly guided within Sunni mainstream Islam.
Wow. What did that schism look like at the time of the empire itself?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So basically, when the Prophet was sort of a few weeks before he was going to pass away, he kind of knew he was very ill, and he was unable to lead prayers with the congregation. And so he appointed Abu Bakr, who became the first Khalif, to lead the prayers with the congregation. And this was sort of a symbolic act, many would say, and would say that that was him sort of giving his blessing and saying, this is who I would like to succeed me. That is what a majority of people thought. However, there was a particular party, and it was a political party at the time, who believed that it should be Ali, who was the cousin of the Prophet and therefore from his bloodline, who should succeed him. So at the time of his passing, this symbolic act that he'd sort of done prior to his death was sort of taken by many, and they were all in favor of Abu Bakr. And this small party, who became known as Shi'at Ali, they were very much opposed to Abu Bakr and said, you know, it should be Ali, it should be someone from within the bloodline and the family of the Prophet. So at the time, it was actually the second Khalif, who was Umar, that propped up Abu Bakr and said, you know, no, it needs to be Abu Bakr. And ultimately, he took the first Khalifa position. At the time it was just political, and it's really later on and after the end of the Rashidun that it begins to gain traction and becomes Shia sect as we know it now. Yeah, so it's really interesting.
That is, and it's so helpful for understanding you talk about it in your modern influence section as well, you know, the modern Islamic schism between the Sunni and Shia, and understanding where that comes from.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of even anyone, but in particular Muslims, don't really know where that comes from. And it's something that's still debated to this day. I'll hear conversations to this day. Should it have been Abu Bakr? Should it have been Ali? And like I say, it's things after the Rashidun Caliphate, for example. Ali's son Hussein was killed at the Battle of Karbala, and that is what gained traction into the sort of more religious sect than political. But it's still super interesting to this day. There's still a debate about it.
This is so incredibly informative because, you know, a lot of the discussions on Islam or the Sunni Shia divide or whatnot all stems directly from this. I mean, this is the divide, this who leads the community after Muhammad's death. And so to so clearly lay this out is again, I'm so grateful, really. You know, Al-Fuzayk really tries to be an educational sector, and this is the biggest piece of education for understanding modern religious and geopolitical and just all of the aspects when it comes to the Muslim world. And so again, this is such an informed, I will say this probably 7 more times throughout this call, but this is so crucial in the foundation of, you know, what does the modern Sunni Shia schism look like? You know, what are the branches or schools or theologies that have come since? All begin with, okay, with Muhammad, who follows? And so, you know, this is so clear and concise and really, really, really helpful. We'll jump more into what happened, you know, during these 4 and during the Caliphate, but just right off the bat, thank you. Because this is, it's so crucial to know the beginning and starting of a conversation to see, you know, 1400 years later, what does it look like today?
Definitely.
All of what I just said is your modern influence section. Anyways, but I just wanted to really make that clear verbally to everyone listening today and who will listen in the future, that this is really where the beginning of the conversations completely stem from. So again, thank you. I'm curious, the Rashidun Caliphate is quite short in its time frame, right? Because it's just these 4. Let's talk a little bit about that, if how, you know, time-wise short really this empire lasted.
Yeah, definitely. So it was very short. It was 29 years only, and in that time they achieved a lot. But it was short, I guess, for a number of reasons. Ultimately, the first Khalif, Abu Bakr, was quite old when he took the position, and he passed away from illness. The final 3 Khalifs actually were murdered, so they each were murdered. Umar was murdered by a Persian slave who Arabs call Abu Lu'lu'a, and he was sort of avenging the fact that Umar had taken a large portion of the Sasanian Empire. So he was murdered. Then we move on to Uthman, and he was murdered after He was accused of nepotism. There was lots of issues in Uthman's tenure, and he was murdered, and that led to the first fitna, which is the first Muslim civil war. And from there onwards, with Ali's tenure, it was kind of just downhill. And that the kind of infighting and the civil war between Muslims is what caused them to sort of end. And ultimately, the Umayyads also were kind of a big part of this time as well. And Uthman was a member of their clan. So he was the third Khalif. And when he became Khalif, the reason he was accused of nepotism is because he was giving many of the key positions within the empire to his kinsmen, so the Umayyad people. And they were kind of, I wouldn't say infiltrating, but they were kind of gaining traction and power through that. So ultimately, when it came to Ali's tenure, they were kind of strengthened and had power to go forward and become the next great dynasty of Islam. So yeah, they achieved a lot in the time, but it was due to the infighting and murders, really.
Wow, I didn't know that. I've studied some of this material before, and I had never heard about this transition between the Rashidun and the Umayyad. But that's so interesting that the Umayyad were actually, it sounds like they were a tribe. Yeah. Okay. That's so interesting.
Yeah. So they were a.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
did I cut you off?
they were a tribe from the. Yeah, sorry, I think it's just skipping a little bit. No, yeah, so they're actually part of the Quraysh from Mecca. So they were like a wealthy merchant clan of people that Uthman was from, and he was one of the earlier converts to Islam that was a companion of the Prophet as well. So through him and his nepotism that he was accused of, he was giving all of these positions to the Umayyads, and that's what kind of overlapped the two. Yeah, it's really interesting.
So how did the economic system work during those 29 years? And do you know at all how it changed when it transitioned into the Umayyads?
Yeah, so basically the economics of the whole empire was founded on the principles of Islam. So the Muslim citizens would have to pay zakat, which is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. And that is, I think, 2.5% of your annual salary that you pay in. And it's seen as sort of a equitable redistribution of welfare, social welfare tax that, supports the less fortunate citizens and so on. So they paid zakat. The non-Muslim citizens were awarded protection and religious freedoms, but were also exempt from military duty. So to compensate for these things, they paid a tax called jizya. So that is the kind of taxes that they used to prop up the empire. But equally, from all of their conquests, they gained a large amount of war booty, and this was used to continue to conquest other lands and things of that nature. In terms of moving into the Umayyad dynasty, I'm not 100% sure, but what I have read about is the fact that kind of strictly by Islam, whereas the Umayyads kind of took the religion a little bit out of their leadership and were a little bit more strict and stern with how they led. So I'm not sure that would be something interesting to look into, though.
We also have Umayyad 101 on our website, so you can absolutely check it out. And they are hyperlinked between the two, as one followed the other. I think it's fascinating, the tax system, to jump this in, because jizya is how almost every empire, to some extent, they might not have called it jizya, but have used that system, basically a tax for the minority religion or minority community to pay homage to the ruling empire or governor or whatever the words may be of that empire, as a sort of protection of that empire, but you were not ethnically or religiously connected to it. That perspective is very common in most Islamic or non-Islamic empires throughout the region, but to have sort of the word and the phrase so embedded in just the 29 years of the Rashidun, every single Islamic empire since has used that system. Economics. So again, so quintessential. And again, just thank you for writing about it. We don't have to go super into 600 tax law, not at all. But I just know that I've seen that term and heard it on most of these civilization calls and just on all the empires we have. I didn't realize it the term originated in the Rashidun. That's fascinating. So fascinating. So quite a lot of tumultuousness, if that's a phrase, given that only 4 caliphs, 3 of the 4 were murdered as a result of all of the political schisms and anger at the time. And then, of course, now leading to the Umayyad and massive conquest across the region. Was there a lot of conquest during the Rashidun, just those specific 29 years as well?
Yeah, definitely. So initially, beginning with Abu Bakr, he the first thing that he set about doing was something called the Ridda Wars. So after the passing of the Prophet, there were many tribes in Mecca and Medina that decided to completely give up the religion and said, we were only followers of the Prophet, we don't care. There were many false prophets as well that said, well, if he was a prophet, I can be a prophet. So his first sort of step was unifying those tribes. Once he'd done that and got them all kind of back on side, he set about incursions into the Sasanian Empire and the Byzantine Empire. So to the east was the Sasanian Empire, which would be modern-day Iraq now, and to the west was the Byzantines, which was Syria. So he set about incursions into both of those lands. They gained a lot of traction. They gained lots of land, but Abu Bakr passed away before they kind of took those lands completely. It was actually Umar, the second Caliph, that sort of had the most success militarily and in terms of conquering lands. So he managed to completely conquer Iraq, Syria. He managed to, I think, if I'm correct, I think he managed to completely cause the Sasanian Empire to cease to exist, and the Byzantine Empire kind of receded greatly so he went into Egypt, parts of North Africa, and yeah, they had great success. Uthman carried this on as well, but then there was all of the infighting and civil war that kind of stopped the military expansion. But yeah, they really did an amazing job in 29 years. They gained a lot of land. Yeah.
It's quite impressive.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear about the huge swaths of land of the Umayyad, Abbasid, and Fatimid, the next 3 major caliphates. But the fact that only 4 major, very influential, but only 4 leaders were able to rapidly expand and promulgate, Islam across the now modern Middle East or Southwest Asia region. Incredibly fascinating. The Sasanian Empire and Byzantine are also on our 101 list, so you can read and engage that conversation. We've also had Sasanian 101 as a previous civilizations call, so you can listen to that and check it out. But wow, I knew there was a lot of emphasis on conquest. I thought it was starting with the Umayyads onwards, but fascinating to know that began almost immediately as the Rashidun did too. Very cool. Thank you for sharing that.
And you even said in your the key accomplishments section, just to summarize this incredible expansion of territory in only 29 years, that they held dominion over all of the Levant, Syria, Iraq, Khorasan. What is that area?
I think that would be part of the Persian Empire at the time, so that would be part of the Sasanian Empire.
Okay.
I think and then present day Iran.
Wow. And then also Egypt, a portion of the North African Strip, and some Mediterranean islands.
Yeah.
And all of that by 656 CE. That's mind-blowing. The other thing I really wanted to ask you about is that there were several other really important kind of transition points during the Rashidun Empire for Islam itself, correct? I know there was something going on with the calendar, and then also the Quran was being developed. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, of course. So, the Quran was revealed to Prophet Muhammad during his life, through what Muslims believe through Angel Gabriel, or Angel Jibril, as we would call him, and it was at first just passed down orally, so it was memorized by people, and it was during Abu Bakr's tenure as Caliph that he kind of thought, this needs to be written down. We don't know what might happen in terms of lands, people coming away from the faith, people mixing with different groups. So we need to have it written down for everyone to access. So he went about codifying and writing down that using trusted scribes of the Prophet. So it was written down by scribes during Abu Bakr's tenure. It wasn't until Uthman's tenure, when the whole of the empire had expanded greatly and was now mixing with other indigenous cultures of different lands, that Uthman realized that, you know, it's being spoken, it's being read in different dialects, many different dialects, and it could lead to misinterpretation of the text. So during his time, it was standardized, and it's that standardization of the Quran that we now read today. So it's his kind of standardization of it, making sure that it's everything correctly as it was, that we still read today, which is super interesting. And also in terms of the calendar, that was during Umar's tenure. So he started the Islamic calendar, and he started it from the year 0 after Hijrah. Hijrah is the migration of Prophet Muhammad from Mecca to Medina. So it starts from that point. And that's something that we still use today. Like you mentioned in the beginning, it's Ramadan now. That's a month within the Islamic calendar, and it's still utilized today. So we're on the year 1442, I think. Yeah. So yeah, they were some of the great legacies that they've left with us today.
I mean, absolutely. That's all the way down to today, is that same codified version of the Quran that's being used. What was the Hijrah? Could you explain a little bit, that you said from Mecca to Medina? Why is that so significant?
Yeah, so that was sort of Prophet Muhammad taking his people, the early converts to Islam, to Medina, to the Quraysh tribes, to try to convert them also and to spread the message of Islam. So it's a pivotal moment to Muslims, and a pivotal moment in sort of expansion of Islam and the empire as well. Yeah, so that's why that's such an important thing, and that's why they began the calendar from that point. It's kind of when Islam starts.
Got it. Oh, that's so interesting.
So that fascinating. First and foremost, thank you for sharing. So what year by the Gregorian calendar was Hijrah? Was that 632, or was it sooner than that?
Oh, that's I'm not
okay
100% sure on that. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I would say it's 6 something, early 600s. Yeah, but I'm not 100% sure.
I'll Google it really quickly. I was just curious because
okay.
I'm assuming obviously it was before his passing, and his passing was 622, so a bit of time. 622.
Okay.
According to my friend Google. So 10 years after the Hijrah,
yeah.
I guess was the pre-Rashidun Islamic beginnings, and then switching. Fascinating. Wow.
Yeah.
This is so much really, really great, fundamentals of the beginnings of Islam today during Ramadan. Honestly, this was so perfectly timed, and it was not planned that way, but incredible information. And I mean, that's there is no, updates, or not updates, that's the wrong word. A different version or different writings of the Quran. It is exactly the same that was penned during the Rashidun, right?
Yeah, and that's something that's taken really, really seriously, and was then the fact that not one single, even, you said you study Arabic, harakat, so like a kasra or a dhamma, nothing has been changed, because if it is changed, it drastically changes the meaning. And Quranic Arabic is something that's altogether more complex than just spoken Arabic. So yeah, nothing changed.
Fascinating. I mean, for all those studying Arabic and those that follow, read, enjoy, engage with the Quran, it's a whole different type of Arabic, and yet I I didn't realize the harakat are also those are basically like vowel markings for those that are if you say an A or an O or an E sound. We're not going to go into calligraphy or lettering today, but that I didn't realize the harakat as well are the same for the past 1400 years. That's really, really, really cool. Wow.
Yeah, it's super important, because when you sort of, as a child, when you learn to read it, if you say a certain harakat wrong, you're changing the meaning. So it's very much like, no, it's this. But yeah.
Well, and I love too, even with all the modern schisms and everything, it's still the same book for every Muslim. That same harakat and same penmanship from the Rashidun Empire. Wow, this is so incredibly fascinating for those Islamic scholars, Muslims across the globe, or just those interested in of the many empires that make up the modern region. Again, wow, thank you. I'm curious, I guess, there was quite a lot of opposition to the foundation of Islam and the conversion process across. I mean, obviously, probably from the Sasanian and the Byzantine for the mega empires, but just even the local communities. Was there quite a lot of like rivalry and difficulty in bringing Islam to the wider region?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most of the sort of issues arise during Prophet Muhammad's lifetime, because prior to Islam, of course, the Arabs, many of them were pagans. They had tribal religions. They worshipped many different gods, or they worshipped statues. So the main issues really were during his lifetime. When it came to the Rashidun, they actually, because of how they sort of led their lands and allowed religious freedoms and allowed certain things in non-Muslim citizens, people were generally quite peaceful and happy within the lands. It was only during sort of Uthman and Ali's tenures and the last few years of the Rashidun that things started to erupt and there was issues, and that was mainly due to socioeconomic issues, because of the large amount of money it took to run such a huge empire, and them not sort of doing so well with gaining all that war booty. And Uthman was also known as being really, really charitable, and so kind of wasn't the best financially. So yeah, it was more due to socioeconomic issues within the empire rather than the religion, I'd say.
Oh, you got a question, right? Can I go ahead? Amazing. This is so fascinating, and you do such an amazing job, Zainab, of giving us the geographical distribution as well as over time. I have a really hard time when I'm learning all of these different civilizations to kind of picture what is happening when and how they relate to each other. And this is really helping me picture how they relate, to Sassanids you mentioned, and how they developed over time. That's really, really helpful for me. I'm a little bit curious about maybe you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but how the ruling structure and the religious elements combined together. And if it was very heavily influenced by religion, if that carried then through the entire 29 years.
Yeah, so as I mentioned in my section in the article about the ruling system, they did incorporate many elements of democracy, and I would say that is sort of in part to play by the religion. They introduced many things that the tribal Arabs were not used to and had never ever had experience of before. So, for example, police forces, courts, parliaments, and those things I think were in a way partly played into by Islam, but also the four leaders, the four Rashidun, were just great leaders of their time and really understood how to lead an empire. So like I said, they introduced all of those different things. They had the House of Parliament that was the Mosque of the Prophet. They had a council of elders that were known as the Shura, who advised the Khalif throughout his tenure. They also required a bay'ah, which was an oath of allegiance. So these were little glimpses of democratic sort of things that they implemented into their ruling structure. And also governors were assigned to certain provinces, which again was just a means of sort of formalizing and bringing together those different provinces. So yeah, I think that's something really interesting that I'd love to look more into. But I think religion plays part of it, but also it was kind of their military and just knowledge of how to lead an empire.
That's so interesting because, even shuras are an element that are used in some countries still today. So these are elements that have continued in different forms all over the world.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of so-called Muslim countries try to still use some of these different things today. They're of course not caliphates like these were, but a lot of these things are still in force today. Yeah.
This is so fascinating, and we can go on forever. I mean, both my and Coretta's backgrounds is in Middle Eastern history and religion and politics, and this is literally the first instance of what we now know of as Muslim countries and Islamic communities and relations. And just thank you. Again, I'm so grateful to you writing this, because we need to have this information out there, but also how clear you are in speaking right now, but also in the written aspect to explain this incredible founding of the Islamic empires writ large and communities now today. So just from the bottom of all Al-Fuzaik's hearts, thank you really for writing about this. This is so quintessentially crucial for everything we know about Islam today. So thank you again, Zainab.
Really... thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Anytime, please. So for all listening, I think we'll wrap it up here. There's so many more goodies about the Rashidun Empire to learn about, so please make sure to go to our website and read it, and many more exciting other articles to come, and empires and engagements, and quite a lot of other great articles written by Zainab as well. Thank you all so much for listening. Again, our website is alfuzaic.net. That's ALFUSAIC.net. So you can read all about the Rashidun Empire and all of the other incredible informational resources we have. Thank you all so much. Have a great evening.